with Muslim fundamentalists, this Islamic Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, or they call themselves. And at one point, these people went to power and overthrow the president, which was a kind of unexpected evolution of the Arab Spring in Egypt. And then it took Al-Sisi, another general, another coup to get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood from power. Right now in Egypt you have a military dictatorship, basically, that took power to get rid of Muslim fundamentalists. So these, up and down are very common, and there is no steady and uniform line of development. Okay, so I guess, if you want to dig into the very interesting details of what happened and what's happening, happened up to the 90s in each of the major Islamic states. The third part of this paper is what you want to read. I think we can... perhaps I'd like to say something about the sociological side of this story, because there is something that is interesting, and basically Al-Naim's intuition is that one of the reasons why Sharia still is authoritative in Muslim countries is that on the one hand there is the necessity to affirm a sort of distinction from the West. Our self-esteem is bound to the fact that we are recognized as different. We don't want to become Westerners because it is as if we were giving in to a world that has always been, other than us, if not enemy of us. On the other hand, Muslims themselves do not like Sharia that much. At least that's what Al-Naim thinks. But they are never capable of expressing that openly and to say, okay, no, we want to get rid of Sharia, because this seems to be a way of undermining the basis of their self-esteem, as Rhodes would call them. Also, another interesting point about this sociological analysis that he makes is that it's not always true that Muslim fundamentalists come from the poorest strata of the society. Actually, they are often university students. So fairly well-educated people, and not, illiterate, ignorant people who are fundamentalists because perhaps they are not happy with the economic situation, and they find Islam as a way of channeling that kind of unhappiness. And most of the time the two things mix together. That's, if you want to look at the typical Islamic fundamentalist according to Al-Naim, you have to think of someone who comes from a very poor strata of the society and gets some education at public universities. So you need to have some education in order to start thinking in terms of, okay, I want Sharia. You have to know what Sharia is. You have to know that Sharia is different from other way of organizing the world. You have to have, it's the typical lethal combination of some knowledge, not a lot of knowledge, some knowledge and economic or social discomfort. When you have the two things mixed together, it's always a bomb. Because of course, if you have a lot of knowledge, you understand that the situation is complex. If you have a problem, you are not going to solve it by instantiating a literal interpretation of Sharia. If you don't have no knowledge at all, you cannot even voice your discontent. But if you have some of it, then you become an Islamic fundamentalist or another kind of fundamentalist. So that's the analysis that he has. Okay, now let's go to the sexy part of the talk. So what we all know, I think he is also a smart guy because he knows that people want to hear of the difficult condition of women in the Islamic world, and he, satisfies our curiosities, focusing on the status of women in Islamic states. As a Muslim, I am particularly concerned with the situation in the Muslim world and wish to contribute to its improvement. I remind you that, the important part for our concerns, our philosophical concern, has to do with what we said at the beginning. Is saying there is a way to be a good Muslim and also to get rid of Sharia, or at least get rid of it through a radically different interpretation. But right now, let's see why Sharia, precisely why Sharia violates the human rights of women. Okay, the perhaps central idea is this notion of Qawwama. Now, let me tell you a personal story about Qawwama. I teach a seminar at the University of Catania on the philosophy of human rights, and I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago, I think, to have among my students actually more than 2 Muslim students, but 2 of them were extremely interesting. Number 1, because they were excellent students. Number 2, because they were married. Number 3, because one was of Tunisian origin, so you would expect that he was a Muslim, but the other one was a clearly Western woman who had converted to Islam and married this guy. So, even when we were talking about the elephant in the room and everything, things went pretty well, and there was never tension or anything of that sort. But when we came to discuss Qawwama, things got a little bit hot, because I was trying to be the An-Nahim of the day there, and we were discussing this very famous part of the Quran that says men have Qawwama, which is often translated as guardianship and authority over women, and because men spend their property because of the advantage men have over them, and because men spend their property in supporting them. So basically, what happened? It happened that, okay, I was trying to be politically correct in this idea of guardianship and authority. After all, even the Christian faith has passages like this. Remember, the woman will obey in the Bible, will obey the man, and not to mention the idea that the woman was created as okay. So, and I added what I should have never had in it. And after all, this is all bullshit. And I got too secular, and this guy said, "Well, look, this is our secretary. What do you mean this is bullshit?" So it went. That was the first part when it got a little bit tensed. The other part was when he was pushing on this idea that no, but this Qawwama is actually a way of protecting women, is a concern for women, because what they're actually saying is that there is an obligation on the part of men to take care of women and so on and so forth. So basically there was this desperate attempt to make the Quran say something that to me is the opposite of what it says, that basically they have an advantage, the men have an advantage over women, and they are kind of expected to exercise authority and provide for their dependents, because that's what women come out to be out of this verse, right? Now, at least according to the Sharia's interpretation of these verse, men as a group are the guardians and are superior to women as a group. And second, men of a particular family are the guardians and superior to the women of that family. Now, notice that Ansha himself, like my student in the classroom, says that this is the Sharia's interpretation of that verse. It's really the translation of that verse into legal norms, but it's not necessarily the only interpretation. This notion of general and specific qawwama has had far-reaching consequences for the status of rights of women in both the private and the public domains. For example, Sharia provides that women are disqualified from holding general public offices, which involve the exercise of authority over men. So you cannot put a woman in a public position such as that she has the authority to tell men what to do. Because in keeping with the verse, of the Quran, men are entitled to exercise authority over women and not the reverse. Now, the other famous example of violation of human rights of women in the Islamic world is the veil, right? Al-hijab. So women are required to cover their bodies and faces in public. That's what the Quran says. Now, according to Sharia's interpretation of the verses that go around the al-hijab, the veil, women are supposed to stay at home and not leave the home except when required by urgent necessity. When they are permitted to venture beyond the home, they must do so with their bodies and faces covered. Al-hijab, the veil, tends to reinforce women's inability to hold public offices and restrict them to public life, their access to public life. They are not supposed to participate in public life because they must not mix with men even in public places. So it's not just the case that no man that is outside of the family is allowed to stay in a house with a woman, but also the presence of women in the public space, by Sharia standard, is not a good thing. And in addition to these general limitations on the rights of women, there are a number of specific rules in private and public law that discriminate against women and highlight women's general inferiority and inequality. So let's see this example. Family law. Men have the right to marry up to 4 women, and the power to exercise complete control over them during marriage, to the extent of punishing them for disobedience if the men deem that to be necessary. In contrast, the co-wives are supposed to submit to their husband's will and endure his punishments. While a husband is entitled to divorce any of his wives at will, a wife is not entitled to divorce, with a little bit of limitation of this principle, because there are cases in which a court may decide that the marriage is null given to grave misbehavior on the part of the husband. Except by judicial order on very specific and limited grounds. Another private law feature of discrimination is found in the law of inheritance, where the general rule is that women are entitled to half the share of men. So if you are a woman, you inherit the half of what your brother inherits. Okay, so that's qawwama and what goes around the al-jahib, the famous veil. but there are further limitations in the public domain. For example, in the administration of justice, Sharia holds women to be incompetent witnesses in serious criminal cases, regardless of their individual character and knowledge of the facts. So, a female witness counts less than a male witness in a courtroom. And in civil case where a woman's testimony is accepted, it takes two women to make a single witness. So, DIA, monetary compensation to be paid to the victims of violent crimes or to their surviving kin, is less for female victims than it is for male victims. So, if you are a victim of a violent crime and you are entitled to compensation, you get less if you are a woman than what you get if you are a man. Okay, I mean, of course, that doesn't mean that even Sharia in the original interpretation has only negative things for women. Again, everything is relative to the time. The fact that, for example, Sharia entitles women to own property was already a big achievement. So they are both entitled to own property, to administer their property. They don't lose their property when they enter into a marriage. So this was already, if you want, in the 7th century after Christ, an achievement. Nonetheless, it's extremely hard to say that there is, again, no conflict with human rights as we understand together, given all the examples that An-Nahim lists. Okay, so what is the point of listing all these wonderful cases that reinforce our disliking of the Muslim world? I'm joking, but or at least a little bit our prejudices as well about the Muslim world. Well, the point that An-Nahim wants to make, also being a Muslim, is that there is possibility to go over this state of affair without losing cultural legitimacy. That is, without asking Muslims to forget that they are Muslims in order to be able to accept human rights. But of course, before we start reforming what needs to be reformed, we need to understand what Sharia is. Otherwise, we go back to the mistake that I was mentioning before. You know, making this rosy picture of a situation in which there is no conflict and ignore the problem, basically. Okay, so he then goes on giving even more examples of women's discrimination in the private sphere and in the public sphere according to Sharia's interpretation and according to actual piece of legislation of certain Islamic states that adopted Sharia. I think we had enough of this. What I want to conclude with is precisely this methodology that An-Nahim gives us to establish this reform. So what is the methodology? It's the one I was mentioning before. Let's see some more details. I've elsewhere argued extensively for this methodology, which I believe would achieve the necessary degree of reform. The basic premise of my position, based on the work of the late Sudanese Muslim reformer Ustad Mohammed Taha, is that the Sharia reflects a historically conditioned interpretation of Islamic scriptures, in the sense that the founding jurists had to understand those sources in accordance with their own social, economic, and political circumstances. So, translating religious indications into legal norms, which, among other things, presupposes the influence of your mentality, the mentality of a jurisprudent of the 6th or 7th or 8th century after Christ. It reflects the world as it was in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century after Christ, and therefore, as such, has a fairly thick amount of contingency in it. In relation to the status of rights of women, for example, equality between men and women in the 8th and 9th centuries in the Middle East or anywhere else at that time would have been inconceivable and impracticable, and of course not just for the Muslim world. Because it's not the case that back then the Muslims were particularly harsh on women. It was the zeitgeist of, it was common across religion to have an inferior position of women. I mean, again, let me remind you of all the chauvinist and anti-egalitarian passages that you find in the Bible. It was therefore natural and indeed inevitable that Muslim jurists would understand the relevant text of the Quran and Sunnah as confirming rather than repudiating the realities of the day. In interpreting the primary sources of Islam in their historical context, the founding jurists of Sharia tended not only to understand the Quran and the Sunnah as confirming existing social attitudes and institutions, but also to emphasize certain texts and enact them into Sharia, while de-emphasizing other texts or interpreting them in ways consistent with what they believed to be the intent and purpose of the sources. So basically they picked and chose, they selected the parts of the scriptures that tended to reinforce their interpretation of women as inferior, while not making the most of the parts of the scripture in which the picture was different. And of course there are passages like that even in the Quran and in the Sunnah. I mean, the idea that we are all children of God, that is not the expression, that's a Christian expression, but basically that we are equal because we are all children of God. There are also passages in favor of religious tolerance, and so on and so forth. So Naim's point is that once Sharia was codified, it was codified influenced by a certain historical moment, and this moment reflects the inherent inequality or discrimination against women tendency that had nothing to do with the religion itself, but was, as I said, the zeitgeist, common across religion. And once we realize that, of course, we can go back to the sacred text, the Quran in particular, and find a culturally legitimate, religiously non-offensive interpretation that gives us a body of law within the Islamic State, still inspired by the sacred text, no secular state. So, cultural legitimacy, and Naim seems to suggest, has to go through the acceptance of the idea that ultimately the state is to be founded on sacred text. But, the sacred texts have more room than what we think for accommodating human rights. Okay, let me stop here, ask you whether, yeah?
Do you think his conclusions would remain the same if he were a woman?
So you're asking whether women would not want a secular state as opposed to a kind of state based on sacred text?
Yeah. And
Yeah, I think so. No. Well, I mean, depends who we are talking about. I mean, we're talking about the wife of Naim. I don't know. But we are talking about, here, the elite of the elite of people who have, left that kind of context when they were students. At most, they have a double identity, if not only one identity now that repudiates the former one. So, but if you're talking about the common Muslim women, no, I think that Naim is right. She would prefer a state based on the Quran that is not discriminatory to her, as opposed to a fully secular state. Because I think Naim is right that for the hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world, living in a state in which the Quran is not the ultimate foundation of the law is a problem. Now, whether this is going to change given the wonderful, powerful consumism and capitalism, which is the true, leading force towards secularization, I don't know. But if you ask me right now, the average Muslim woman, would she be more happy to live in a fully secularized state? No, I don't think so. But that's just my opinion. I mean, we should go on and ask. I mean, when I was mentioning that rather astonishing result of the polls that these political scientists did in Saudi Arabia, seeing that 80% of the population think that there must be equality between men and women, there must be no discrimination. I don't think that what they meant is that they want a constitution that doesn't make any reference to the Quran. They were saying that we should interpret our faith in a more egalitarian way. It's a completely different thing. I mean, remember that even in our world, it took a couple of 100 years of wars and the necessity at one point was, I mean, we didn't choose the secular state. We were forced to establish the secular state because it was the only way in which we would stop killing each other on the base of faith. So it's not that, there was a philosophical movement that started preaching the importance of keeping religion out of politics, and the population agreed with this great mind that, okay, let's forget about religion, fuck religion, we want, a good liberal state that is neutral towards any religion. Sure, it's not against religion, but we don't want our constitution to be infected by any religiously defined principle. All this is talk about should we put in that Europe has Christian roots. No, in the end, it was rejected, this proposal. I mean, we don't want to say that Europe has Christian roots because we don't want to be bound to a specific religion. So we didn't choose the secular state. We were forced to adopt a state that was neither Catholic nor Protestant, in such a way that both Catholics and Protestants could live peacefully next to each other. So, right after 300 years that we live in a secular state, now we have been socialized with the idea that it's a good thing that the Constitution stays out of religion, or that religion stays out of the Constitution. But, it was a very long process that did not start with a conscious choice. So, but honestly, I don't know the answer to your question. It would really take a serious set of interviews across the sectors of different countries in the Muslim world, interviewing women with specific questions to have an answer. But if you ask me, I think that in general, the process of secularization has not gone far enough that most women, called some women of course, but I don't think that most women in the Muslim world would say, no, let's forget about the Quran. We don't need that in the public sphere. At most, we need it for our private practice of religion. But other than that, that's enough. No, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, Milena.
So, what is your argument to say that this reforming Islamic laws is not an imposition, cultural imposition? Because you told us that you have two students that
Yeah.
that are agreeing with this idea of to be protected by Parliament.
No. I wasn't suggesting that. I think that they were pretty much happy with Al-Nahim's proposal. In fact, what they reacted to was my idea that, okay, but you don't really believe that these are the words of God, right? And they said, no, we believe that these are the words of God. So, but I didn't mean to be blasphemous. I think we all agree with the idea that even if you believe in a religion, you have to take certain parts of the revealed religion in a metaphorical way. We don't really believe that we were born by a piece of mud on which God, like a magician, threw. So you have to do a lot of analogical and metaphorical work in order to make sense of that narrative. And that's the only thing I was trying to convey there, and they did not like that. But other than that, I think that we're happy with this idea of reinterpreting the sacred text in such a way that that they are no longer incompatible with human rights, because they liked human rights. Of course, sometimes they went a little bit too far. I mean, this woman, for example, as a typical neo-converted, was saying, no, the condition of women in Islam is much better than in another religion. I've studied the Bible. So I didn't have to convince them of the possibility of adopting that model, and also on the desirability of doing that, because they were with me. You were skeptical about that.
No, a little bit.
No, but it was fascinating to see this girl. I mean, I think she was 25, 26, and most, fully dressed as a Westerner, and you understand that, she was Italian, of course, and so on and so forth. She decided to switch, and now I know that they are in Belgium, I think. Well, they seem to be doing well. So, yeah.
I was thinking about another situation that happens here in Brazil, the case of testemunhas de Jeová. I don't know if you know.
Everybody knows about
Yes.
those people that knock at your door.
Because we are talking about a state that is a religion, the case of Sharia. But the case of testemunhas de Jeová is a little bit different, because it's a religion that's like a state.
A religion that?
That's like a state.
Like a state.
Like a state to this community. And I don't know, I was actually thinking about what the state should do in the case of some member of this small society is expelled or expulsed, I don't know.
Expelled
Of this community, because I know a situation of a family that since the beginning they were present in this
community.
And my friend discovered that her mother was cheating her father.
was cheating on
Cheating.
her father.
Yes, and
Mhm.
they decided to say to the community, oh, see, she denied his father, she should get out of the community. And she did that, this denounce. And the family, not only the mother, but also the family was expelled from the community, and everybody started not to talk to them anymore. And the community was like the family.
Mm.
Everybody was like friends, not only friends, but also the family.
Oh,
And what the state should do in this situation, because they lost automatically the family. And the other case is the group of conservative Jews in the United States. I don't remember the name. I don't know if it's Hassian. It's like a
conservative,
ultra conservative.
ultra Christian, basically. The newborn Christians,
Jewish.
these people.
Jewish.
Are Jews? Ah, so, okay. Mhm.
Orthodox.
Orthodox.
And there is a movie about this community in New York, and it's very complicated. I don't know much about them, but in this movie shows that some group of women that decided to get out of the community, and they couldn't receive anymore the support of the government, because the government supports this conservative community. They don't produce like normally in capitalism system. They don't make money. They live like in the last century, and the government gives this money. So when these women decided to get out of this group, they lost money.
They lost the money that the state was
They were-
giving
yes,
in virtue of their
because
being.
they weren't anymore part of this group,
Yeah.
and they couldn't also produce because they didn't know any ability.
It was too late because they
Yes,
didn't
so-
study. They didn't.
yes,
Yeah.
and they couldn't also pay lawyers to get the children.
To get what?
The children.
Ah,
So
their children.
their children, because if you are out of the community, you cannot raise your children anymore.
Hmm.
So the group could pay lawyers, and the problem is that they decided to get out of the community. They lost everything: money, children, family. Very
I see.
complicated situation. So this is like apostasy. It's not physical, but it's like social, existential.
There is a social punishment
Yes, and
against apostasy.
What the state could do in this situation, because I don't know, it's like a violation. I don't know if you could consider this violation of human rights, and if the state interferes, if it's like being not multicultural, or if it's like protect human rights. So
Yeah.
I
No,
don't know what to
Right.
say about
I think these are two excellent examples. Let me start with the second one. Okay, the general principle is that a liberal state should protect the right to exit of any community, including communities that are not liberal. So you want to live as an Amish, you want to be treated as inferior simply because you are a woman, you want to be denied certain rights that you would have if you were not part of that religious community, fine. The moment you decide to leave that thing, if somebody gets on the way, the state enters and say, no, wait a minute. The law of the state is more important than, the individual rights of that person are more important than any loyalty to the community that you might have. But your question is different. Question is, when, even if the state protects the right to exit, but exiting as social, economic costs that are so high, should the state provide for these people that exit something? Now, we want to make a distinction here, I think, but perhaps you can help me here. On the one hand, I don't think that there is any way that the children of these women exiting the Jewish the Ultra-Orthodox Orthodox Jewish community could legitimately remain within the community in virtue of a communal bond. I mean, that if they are children of those women, unless there are no other parents, there must be a judge that says, no, these children go with the women, period. I mean, I would be extremely surprised if there was a sort of exception to that rule. A different case is whether there is an obligation of the state to support economically these women who have no skills or that are temporarily in a difficult condition because they no longer have the support of the community. And here, I don't know, let's talk about it. My intuition would be to say that no. I mean, once you decide to leave, you know that there are consequences, but you also need to accept the duties and rights of any other citizen, including the fact that you have to provide for yourself as much as you can. Okay, you are not a very skilled worker, fine. Find an unskilled work, but that there must be a state coming and saying, okay, here is, because at that point there could be the argument, but then you are really subsidizing secession from my religious community. That's not good. So you're not doing it in the name of individual liberties. You are doing in the name of repressing my religion, which is not acceptable from a liberal point of view. So there are different issues going on here. I mean, when we talk about is the religious faith stronger than private law, which among other things says that if someone is your child, you have the right to be their guardian, or there must be a positive duty on the part of the state to support this leaving the religious community. No, I don't think so. But that's my opinion, I guess, or my interpretation of what a liberal state should do in those cases. What do you think?
I agree, but I think that doesn't happen always because the situation of this Orthodox community, the move is about these women that lost the children in the United States. So it's like more like practical and economical problems. They cannot pay an employer, and the community is thinking. So it's like I agree that the ideal is this. It should happen like this, but the practice doesn't happen.
Right. Well, there is also the problem that, I mean, to what extent the liberal state should allow. I mean, for example, I'm sure, I don't know whether in Brazil, but in Italy there is the obligation for children to go to school until they are 14 at least. So, what happens if a religion says that, like some interpretation of Sharia, that women should no longer be educated? There was these crazy people who, remember, there was in 1979 an attack and a seizure of the mosque in Mecca, the most important Mecca, where all the Muslims are supposed to go at least once in their life. There were these terrorists, these sort of fundamentalists within Saudi Arabia. People who thought that the Saudi Arabian government was too secular and liberal, they took over the mosque, and they took hostage the thousands of people that were around, and then it all finished with a bloodshed, with the Saudi Arabian government killing these people, but of course also killing other hostages in the. So why am I saying that? Yeah, because what happens if there is a conflict between a law of the state, every children has to go to school until 14 years, and a possible prescription of a religion that says that at least female should not receive an education. Yeah, I mean, there are different ways of dealing with that thing. I mean, if you look at at people who are very much in favor of community rights, such as Kimlingham, but always from a liberal perspective that says, in the end, if there is a conflict, I mean, I want to provide for you to be able to live the life that you have chosen within this minority group. If you want to practice your language, perhaps there is an obligation on the part of the state to allow to have teachers that teach your language as opposed to the majoritarian language in the state, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, if there is a conflict between individual rights or the rights, I mean the most important provisions and rules of a state and your religion, the rules of the state prevail. Now, what happens in practice? Yeah, perhaps the only problem there was that there is no guarantee of public, that there are no public lawyers there that could help those women